My name is Gabriela.
You look great.
I am one of the instruction and research librarians down at the KFL. It's like right over there. You can't quite see my office, but I am in there hanging out. And I was asked to participate in these roundtables. So here's my roundtable. I will give some awesome caveats and some self-deprecating humor that I apologize for. That is the type of way I roll. I didn't get a ton of sleep last night. I was kind of nervous. So I apologize for that. And this was a little bit, I wanted to make it more interactive, and to me, roundtables mean interaction. So I'm going to try and provide some context and do a little bit of lecture stage on the stage stuff. But I do hope to do some small group work and then sharing out, and then a little bit more of the roundtable where there are some posed questions and I encourage people to answer them, go around and talk about what they're seeing and any of the additional questions they have. What you might have also noticed is that I can get kind of excited and talk a little fast sometimes. So I do ask that if you are having trouble understanding me, or if I'm speaking too quickly, or I'm throwing in a lot of jargon that you don't understand, by all means, please let me know, raise your hand or shout out. I feel like a pretty informal place. So let me know. We all have agency over our own learning, right? And so I want you to feel welcome and encouraged to get what you want and what you can at this roundtable presentation. All right, let's see if this clicker works. I turned it on. All right, so again, agenda. I'd like to lay out a little bit of a roadmap so people know where we're going. We're going to do quick introductions. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the outcomes from this project in general. Because it was a Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative Principles Fund project, there were outcomes that I was asked to kind of meet. I have not completed the project yet. It's November, but I am hoping that part of this roundtable will be getting feedback from y'all and getting ideas from y'all on how to improve the project, because it is geared towards undergraduate students, maybe especially early undergraduate students. So from what I understand, quite a few of your last few years of yours. So I'd love to hear your feedback, especially. And then obviously faculty and staff, y'all teach this in different ways, and I'm always interested in learning more specific ways and examples that you might be talking about this. So outcomes and expectations. For expectations, again, I feel like I'm pretty informal. Please let me know if I'm speaking too quickly, too softly, anything like that. We will be doing sort of roundtable, small group stuff. So I do ask that you be respectful of your group mates and listen with intention and kindness, and have the idea that everyone's coming at it with good intentions. I'm going to be going over the background and the context of both like the project, but then also how I'm framing it in terms of the principles and values, along with my the framework for information literacy. It's the first time you're going to get to hear some jargon. It is a framework that is through the library and librarianship, academic librarianship in particular. So I'll be kind of talking about how that framework came to be, giving a little bit of context for it, and then we're going to be going through and talking about like two information systems that I kind of came up with that are overlapping, but have some differences that I think are important. And then we're going to do some group work, share out, and more on to it. Lots of talking. Sorry, y'all. Okay. So who, what, why, where, all the fun stuff. Again, my name is Gabriela. The two that I'm kind of marrying with this project through the Daniels Fund are the framework for information literacy in higher education, and my interest in curriculum, and being able to integrate some of these Daniel Fund initiatives into that. Okay, the outcomes for the students for this project were laid out by the Daniels Fund project, and you were kind of supposed to select which outcomes might be working best. So theoretically, some of the outcomes for this, I'm going to be super boring and read out these outcomes, okay? Our students understand principles are constant foundations for all situations. Students understand the positive long-term impact of using ethical principles. Students are able to identify ethical issues and implications in real-world situations. Students are able to apply ethical principles in real-world making decisions. expand knowledge of basic principle-based ethics in organizations, enhance principle-based ethic instructions in non-business disciplines, and finally, expand and improve principle-based ethic instruction across the region served by the university. Lots of kind of six, seven, I don't know, I can't count, of the outcomes that I think I'll be able to at least touch on with some of the products that I will be creating. The artifacts that I told the DFEI that I would create are a zine, super fun. Liz, what is a zine?
A zine is a small scale publication made for passion, not profit.
That's the short version. Thank you very much. And I'm hoping to make a series of videos, short, quick, interactive videos discussing some of the frames and how the principles fit into them. And a workshop in the spring, and have sort of a research guide page for it to kind of house it. Though potentially, I guess we could put it on an LMS or on Canvas or something like that too. What does all that mean? Yep, I was skipping around. Sorry, y'all. The outcomes for today. Eat some good food. I hope you get to eat some good food. I hope you get to talk to some of your classmates and maybe understand a little bit about these principles and the framework, and get to think about how you might find real life examples. And that's basically all I'm asking for. I know it's a lot to ask for, and it's only about an hour, if less than that maybe. So being able to talk about this, I think, and think about it and have some time for reflection is the outcome I hope for most. Yeah. Okay. And then expectations for this session, what are y'all hoping for? I don't know that I can switch this up fast enough, but is anybody awake enough or wanting to mention anything in terms of expectations for this roundtable or this session?
I'd like to maybe hear about some of the safeguards that you guys have in place to, stop institutional practices that remove certain historical things from online databases to conform with whatever cultural norms are at the present time, sort of rewriting history, so to speak.
I don't know that I have a lot of information about that, but that sounds like a really interesting thing to talk about. I will say.
Sorry, my question was supposed to be.
No, I think it's really interesting. I don't have a lot of control or say over our collections. I get to make suggestions sometimes, but we have a collections department that gets to talk to them. And some of these things, sorry, as a random aside, right? We don't always, at least from my perspective, Liz may have a different one. We don't always have a ton of control over what the vendors will put into databases and take out. That happens sometimes where the vendors will not, I guess, have enough usage on it and they will change out materials. So the model that the library uses kind of counterintuitively is we purchase physical books, right? For the most part, we have some rented ones, but a lot of our electronic materials are rented. So it is dependent upon the vendor a lot of the time. We go into these agreements that, have 3 to 5 year spans and are kind of dependent. And when it comes up for renewal is when we have a little bit more power.
And so that kind of answers my question. Essentially, we're just asking, what are the ethical safeguards in place to ensure that the materials we're getting in our library are aligned with, historical factual evidence. They're not being rewritten or displayed in a way that's different. You have to ignore it.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
And I think it's really hard. There are a lot of power structures and things in place that can make it difficult to get underrepresented voices and things more said. So
Thank you.
We have on the chat, it says that they
I'll
say
read it aloud. Jaden says, I'm autistic and struggle with college. I've been attending college since I was 13 years old. So I'm just wanting to immerse myself in more things that interest me. I am huge on ethics in higher education for disabled people. So maybe he's wondering what kind of facets you guys have in place to kind of further that sort of position.
it's a great question. And I think aspects of accessibility are part of our mission. But I think we share that with a lot of the university too, in terms of accommodations and access. But it's a great question. It's very awesome, Jaden, to do it for so long. And I know it can be a slog, and some of the funnest parts of being in higher ed are immersing in stuff you like, but having to do stuff you don't like to.
Thank you for being honest, Jaden, because that's a huge factor. And especially with ethical considerations, we want to be looking out for the people who don't have a voice or feel they can't speak up about their disabilities.
100%. Any other, yes,
So it's just a general question, especially with the title, money waters and sharing information. This is not really to our office in Canada, but just in general university system. We're going through a provost search, we're going through lots of restructuring. So really, I want to know information on, again, the ethical safeguards of learning so much information that could be considered money to share for some people, but for others, it's okay. And there's just a lot of information where we're told this is all happening, everyone knows about it. At the same time, is it okay to share among students? Is it okay to share among faculty members, right? Because we don't want all the students to know that, hey, we're going through restructuring right now. You know, this stuff might not exist in like a year or so. So that's really what I want to know is, again, those ethical safeguards when we have such broad amounts of information coming at us. And a lot of it is very sensitive, I would say.
I have zero comments to that. I 100% the muddy waters thing, the audience, who has access, who has knowledge of this, what are the sharing practices? We could definitely like talk about applying some of the principles to it. And again, it's just nuance is so like it's all, I feel like it's all muddy. We really I think as human beings, a lot of us would really appreciate, and maybe as very young people and teenagers and stuff, we really expect information to be black and white, yes or no, right or wrong. And it feels like it's a rite of passage to have to be like, okay, the answer is it's complicated and there's nuance and it's muddy and it's so situation specific sometimes, that I think sometimes being able to explore it, whether through reflection or small groups using things like the principles or the framework or any other professional kind of, or non-professional, whatever your morals and ethical frameworks are, it can be really important to really reflect on it and reflect on it for yourself too, in terms of like, am I approaching this with bias? All of us have bias in some way or another. You were raised that way. You see the world through a frame, but being able to recognize that and what you may be missing is really important. So, sorry, great questions. There's probably room for conversation for that, but I won't necessarily be addressing it in mine. I'll just, yes, the English faculty, excellent.
Research and how our students use these databases to do the kind of research that we have to do in our classes. And I'm thinking a lot about like the way that different stakeholder groups may or may not be represented in the types of research that they're capable of doing, and how we can encourage students to keep that in mind so that when we're doing research, we call it confirmation bias, but sometimes we turn into like heat-seeking missiles trying to look for like the source that does the thing.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes we lose track of the fact that like we need scholarships to represent all of the people involved in an argument. So how can we kind of like navigate and negotiate information literacy into making sure that all of the research that students are doing is as narrow and focused on the subject, but also kind of broad and open to all the potential people that get impacted in different communities and different stakeholders that are impacted by the outcomes of research, and how do the databases and the way that we learn how to use those databases help us make sure we're kind of checking those boxes when we're thinking about how well our research kind of covers the entirety of the issue.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. And I would also say that some of this is like socioeconomic too, in that our databases tend to cost a lot of money. And so they tend to put things that are often already behind paywalls, behind this paywall, and provide it to students. So there are definitely marginalized voices that are missing from our databases too. So some of it does take getting out of that bubble of academia and stuff like that to be able to get some of those stakeholders. And I think it's really interesting. One of the frames that we'll kind of briefly touch on is authority is constructed and contextual. And in that case, a lot of academia and maybe things in our databases are going to be heavily geared towards peer-reviewed things that have a high level of authority through construction, like constructed authority through, oh, you have this degree, you're doing this research, you have this job experience, you went through all this editing and peer review to do it versus something that is valid from a stakeholder who has lived experience and has that authority in their own life, but is not necessarily, their voice isn't necessarily heard in the peer review. So there's a lot of like interesting things going on that I think, yeah. Did you have one too, Catherine?
My input was very similar to Michelle's, but what I'm hoping to get out of the session is just exploring that overlap between how to guide student research and in ways that it integrates the principles. Largely Joe was saying, so no, I don't know.
Does anybody else have anything I want to add or talk about? And some of this may be like tabled for like smaller group conversation too. So I think there's a lot of room for talking, which is a round table, right? So I'm hoping that there'll be some room for that. All right. I think I covered everything that I wanted to on this. Okay. So additional context, because this can be very weird and frustrating, right? I'm coming at this from a librarian point of view, specifically an academic librarian. Librarians oftentimes are hired and expected to have a library degree. It's a master's degree in library science. Our accrediting body, I'm going way back, sorry guys. Our accrediting body is the American Library Association. And so that's our professional organization. They accredit United States and Canada? And Mexico. Okay. So they accredit all the programs that way. It is our the main professional organization for librarians in North America, and probably worldwide, maybe. But they have divisions. And one of them is the ACRL, the Association for College and Research Libraries. And they're the ones that are over academic libraries, okay? They came up with multiple like frames and standards over the years. We used to have the standards for information literacy. I think it was like 2000, 2001 when they came out with those. And now in about 2015, 2016, they came out with the frames for higher education. There are 6 frames. They're listed here. The first is authority is constructed and contextual. The second is information creation as a process. Information has value. Research is inquiry. Scholarship is conversation. And finally, researching a strategic value or exploration. Super wordy. Super kind of like, what does that mean? I have, I want to say 5. I think we got 5, right? Handouts that are actually stapled copies of the frames. And I'm just going to start like 2 on one side. Oh, okay, awesome. If you just kind of sporadically, just that for now. If you were curious about it, they have a little bit more of an explanation and then like dispositions and stuff like that. So these are sort of like the library for academic students, kind of things that we should be thinking about when we're teaching information literacy and talking to students about information literacy in general. Okay. They also, I think in the very back of the packet might have something for addressing faculty, if you're curious too. Okay. So this has been around for almost 10 years. They're potentially going through revisions. Yay. I don't know what the timeline is for that. But that is something that's been around for a little bit. And so some of y'all faculty might already be quite familiar with it. You've probably been hit up and discussed about that. 2 more. I have this one. It's not stapled, but I'm going to use that one.
But it's okay. No
Okay.
worries. I handed out.
I don't know.
And I wanted to, like, on top of this, be able to also discuss the Daniels Ethics Fund principles. So there's 6 of these with some explanations under it. And there's 8 Daniels Fund principles. Thankfully, they have these awesome posters. And I also added a copy here. So the Daniels Fund ethical principles are integrity, trust, accountability, transparency, fairness, respect, rule of law, and viability. And then they have a brief sentence underneath them, kind of giving context to what exactly Daniels Fund means in that aspect. Okay, so I'm thinking, hey, if I want to be teaching the students the frames or at least aspects of the frames in information and literacy classes or when I get invited to classes, and I think that the Daniels Fund principles are interesting and Cobb is super influential and cool. I want to see how these can map to some of these into the information literacy that I might be talking about in classes. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's what my project is mainly going to be about is when I create that zine and the videos and finish editing some other things, I want to be mapping those on so that students can better understand where I'm coming from and see examples of it potentially. And then maybe to give scaffolding either for faculty to do it themselves if they would be interested in it, or if they would like to welcome me into their classroom, I'd be happy to go in. So that's kind of what my thinking was for this project. Okay, and then the other piece of this, whoops, was the information systems. And this is the kind of sludgy part, especially muddy, silty part. I have broken it down into two main information systems. There's more, obviously, but I figure for undergraduate students, the two main that they interact with is maybe especially in college are going to be like the internet in general, which is, you know, a great, big, huge umbrella to stick all these things under. And then contrast that potentially with library resources, which are behind a paywall, right? You pay money to be a student, you pay tuition, and you are granted access, or your faculty and staff, and you work here and you're granted access to library resources. We do have some alumni resources, but they are more limited than student resources. So that's a measure of access too that we don't always talk about, especially to outgoing students, is the potential academic scholarship they may be losing access to whenever they leave. Depending on where you work, you may have more or less access. If you work at a huge company, it's going to have way more expensive databases, and they may be more willing to pay for articles and things like that, then your access would increase. If you are working at a small office or working for yourself, potentially your access to resources could decrease, and you may lose access. You will lose access to quite a few of our databases. So just another weird kind of access point. Okay, so these are the two kind of like environments or systems that I particularly wanted to map on those values and the principles. Okay, and some of the reason I say it's kind of muddy is that like library resources we pay for they're indexed typically and cataloged. You might use OneSearch, that main search box on the library homepage, to keyword search and try and find information that's indexed, which can be really helpful, but it's cataloged and put in a specific way, okay? Whereas the internet, and maybe especially if you're using something like search engines, that's crawled, right? It's crawled and they are presenting results based on all manner of measurements like SEOs and everything else, okay? But they do include a lot of really important information, and if you use something like Google Scholar, you'll find that they have indexed a lot of information that you may or may not have access to. Has anybody searched Google Scholar before? Yeah, and tried to find an article. Have you had success on it, or sometimes you run into a paywall, or what happens?
Sometimes it's good stuff, sometimes it doesn't. Usually depends, really.
It does depend, right?
More often than not, I run into a paper.
More often than not. Okay, so what does that look like to you? What happens?
Well, I mean, you find good relevant data, and then you get a snapshot of it, and then you try to dig deeper, and then they want your money.
That's right. So the vendors, the environment, the publishers are asking for money for these articles that you may or may not already have access to the library. So that's just another point of access and potentially an obstacle to a lot of students who may or may not know. You might have noticed that on campus, we are indexed in Google Scholar. So if you are searching Google Scholar, you might notice that it has find it at UCCS, and you can click on that link. It'll drive you to the database and then it'll provide you access. If you're off campus, you can add us under library links. Let us know if you have problems and we can get you hooked up with that. So it's a little bit easier to search Google Scholar and you can see a little bit more immediately what is available and what isn't. Okay, as a reminder though, there's other like publicly available indexes like PubMed. Have y'all heard of PubMed? Some of y'all? Okay. From my understanding, it's publicly available. It is an index of mostly medical kind of journals and articles. A lot of them may be available because a lot of them got federal funding for things. So a lot of the times when things are federally funded, they are required to provide access to the public because it was paid for at least partly by tax dollars. So they'll provide access to some of that, which is really interesting, I think. But otherwise, they might pop you back to the publisher or to the library. Okay. Are there any questions about this? Yes.
Okay, just talking about the examples. When I was going through my doctoral research phase, I relied on ResearchGate when I couldn't find what I was looking for it for through OneSearch, or if I, even through logging in the library and using Google Scholar that way, if I got to ResearchGate was another one that was really useful. It's just like a European version, so just trying to find other ways.
100%. So we kind of briefly discussed authority and context, right? But one of the other frames is information as process. And what sometimes happens is that somebody will conduct research, write up a manuscript, submit it, it'll get accepted, and it'll get published into a journal. But the journal may be hard to get to, right? It costs a lot. So as an aside, as an anecdote, my mother, right? She wanted to sell a tea that she liked a lot. She picked it and it's Yopan tea. It's native to North America. And she had heard of an article that described the medical benefits of it, but she wasn't able to get it because she only had access to the public library, and interlibrary loan, where we borrow a copy from somebody else, was going to cost her money. So one thing that you can kind of do as a workaround that she did, worked for her, is to contact the author. And the author might provide you an author's manuscript, which doesn't look as official as the peer-reviewed one that has all the special stuff. But a lot of the time, the authors want their research disseminated. They want other people to know. They want a conversation to be started around their research, because scholarship as conversation is a really important part of knowing what's going on and moving the discipline forward, right? So some of them will provide author manuscripts or copies of their work on ResearchGate, which can be really, really helpful. There's other methods you've probably heard of. I won't mention them for legal reasons. But there's definitely a lot of, just as a reminder, there's a ton of socioeconomic legal stuff going on. And it can prove to be helpful, and it can prove to be an obstacle to getting information. So, okay. That was so much. Sorry, guys. I swear to God. You're like, oh, there won't be that much talking. She talked for 30 minutes. Okay, so we're really breaking it up now. Okay, I'm really hoping that we can get into smaller groups. I don't know how big. I'm thinking like 5. The teachers in the room got some advice for how big a small group should be. 3 to 4. Okay, so even smaller. 3 to 4 groups. 3 to 4 groups, or 3 to 4 person per groups, if you would. And what I'm hoping to do, I didn't have enough copies, but I think we have about 30 copies of these. Oh no. Yes. Okay. Sorry.
I can pass.
Okay, that would be awesome. I'm hoping that each of you will get one of these pieces of paper. It's going to have 2 of the frames on it. It's going to have information has value, and then on the other side, it's going to have authority is contextual and constructed and contextual. And it's going to be really similar to that ACRL handout that I handed out, but I just wanted you to look at these 2 frames in particular. Okay, I'm hoping everybody will get a copy, and then if you're in small groups, I was hoping that you would discuss these things. The principles are right here. And I'm hoping you'll do 3 things and give you about 15 minutes to do it. I'm hoping that you will discuss the overlaps with the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative principles that you see potentially interacting with the frameworks. And I'm hoping that you will discuss and map the frames, and maybe especially the dispositions. Sometimes the dispositions, they're listed under the frames, might be a little bit easier to navigate. And the principles to those 2 information systems, the internet and maybe library resources. That's the 2 information systems to do it with. And then finally, I'm hoping that you will reflect on examples of how to apply those 8 principles and potentially the frames within those information systems. And then after about 15 minutes, I would hope that we're going to kind of share out, and then we're going to also have roundtable time. That make any sense? Sort of? Okay. Okay, and I'll be walking around, ask me questions, let me know. It's like 9:25, so plus 15 is like 9:40. Is that right? So we'll meet back up at about 9:40. Y'all want to get in small groups. Thank you. You won't be quizzed on it, obviously, but I am hoping to get a couple of ideas, whether it's you actually mapping it, whether it's examples you had, or things that came up or things of interest. I was hoping to get maybe something from each group, if you would. Y'all have anything you want to share?
Yeah, right. We very quickly got on the topic of AI.
Mm-hmm.
Information and what do we talk? Well, we talked about how the information has value. There's lots of connections to integrity of information, accountability, of course, viability. Yeah, and I'm really interested as a faculty member, how I can work to change some of my assignments, to ask students to work with AI instead of saying, don't work with AI. Because I feel like in the future, that's what they're going to be having to do in the world is to work with AI. But it's a new area. So I was asking you about that. Well, from students and faculty.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you for having a student in our group. It was really cool. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Does any of the student groups want to talk? Go for it.
I think a lot of the dispositions and like the frames were related to kind of respect and integrity from the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative. I feel like throughout most of them, respect and integrity could be like included in some sort of way. Kind of just respecting others, respecting kind of their rights and privacy, and then integrity being honest and like real.
Very cool. Did any other student groups wanted to talk? Is there anything, any particular examples you'll have from assignments, AI, the library databases, internet, anything you want to talk about? Okay. A group over here, did you want to add anything? Yes.
Hey, Liz.
Hey, Liz.
There's so much.
Hey, I'm glad. I did my job.
I know one of the things that it was on the larger handout.
Mhm.
One of the dispositions that I wanted to talk about was encouraging students to think about how their research is part of a larger conversation. It's not the be all end all. And the research that you often read is not, this is not the final resource and answer on this topic. It's part of the ongoing conversation and the ethics principles that tie into understanding that, respecting the role that you play within that conversation.
Yeah.
And respecting the way that you encourage others then to, I think as faculty, we have a large responsibility to help students see that they're part of that conversation. And there's a lot that I should do more of when I'm teaching to help them see that they're part of that larger conversation. And you did the work, now it's done. That's the right.
Yeah.
So it just reminds me of more good practices that I need to integrate into my assignments and the language that I use. What else do we do?
Well, we were just getting started talking a little bit about information privilege. And that's something I really started to sort of see in person as I started to work with librarians internationally. Because I hear about librarians in China who have severe restrictions on what they have access to when they're searching. Sons would work taught in Germany. All of the assignments they were given and assigned had been handwritten because people were so afraid of AI and the fact that things might be plagiarized. So it's really interesting as we are in a very global culture right now. So I think because this information is being shared across boundaries so far, it is also giving us the perspectives of people who are not in this strongly Western context.
Thank you, Liz. Did the next group want to add anything?
Yeah, we talked about the information consumption and its relation to, I think we decided to coin the term checkbox culture, and just the nature of within a capitalist system, like this urge to produce and get things done and not necessarily engage in
maybe due diligence and really asking how sources came to be, why we should listen to them, and really like taking that time in a kind of a hustle bustle context. We kind of glaze over that and just are like, oh, just get the assignment turned in, whatever, we'll just read the abstract, call it good. And how that really goes against some of these principles that we want to develop, right? We want to have in conversations with integrity that really get to the core of what information systems are presenting, what pieces of information are offering, that we want to be able to trust the stakeholders, not just like say like, oh yeah, that looks good, like really take the time to ask the hard questions. So we're talking about ways we're all like education focused. And so we're like, how can we foster those conversations within classrooms to say, who is saying this, what are they really saying, and just create a space to engage with that one. Did I summarize that? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank y'all so much for engaging with all of that and sharing out. Is there anything else y'all wanted to share from your small group stuff? You gotta leave 5 seconds of awkward silence.
It's best practice.
All right, so like for the last 10 minutes, or if y'all want to head out now, round table, right? So this thing is actually called a round table, the presentation, the event. And to me, again, round table is just like, this is a roundish. I know it's a U, okay? But it's like sort of roundish. And so theoretically, maybe not so much sage on the stage, right? A little bit more equal footing, sharing out what we're feeling, what we're knowing, examples we have. And so I came up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5. I can't count. Some questions. If anybody wanted to engage with them or ask, or if you had any questions that you wanted to ask of the rest of the group, I'm kind of hoping to take a little bit more of a back seat and open this up so we can all engage if you'd like. So I guess first one, right? Do y'all have any questions for the group? We kind of answered that one a little bit, but give you a little bit more time. And then what are some examples of mappings or connections that we missed? Or were there maybe disagreements within your small group or things that you hadn't thought about that you wanted to add more nuance to? Yeah.
Okay, so I have a general question for the students in the room. I'm not here for so we're talking about information systems, and I teach in the Department of History in the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. I feel like my students have a really good, pretty savvy sense of information. Information literacy, getting access to information. I find where not all, but some of them struggle is the jump when I'm asking them to use specifically the library databases that are the proprietary, kind of behind the paywall things, because they're so used to searching stuff on the internet. So I'm just wondering, like, if anyone wants to share, like, is that true that is a hard jump to make? And if so, how can we as faculty help students navigate that? Because I do a library session, right? Info session. Sorry, I don't know if this is exactly what you wanted, but I was like, I'm going for it. I do a library info session, and it's a early in the semester, but then when the students are actually doing their research paper, I think they like almost forgot that.
I think that's a really good point you make. If I can speak from my experience through my undergrad and now into my beginning of my graduate degree, it's commonplace for all students to revert back to searching the way that they are most comfortable, the way that they've grown up searching, and that's kind of broadly searching through Google, things like that. Once students get better at adapting and learning the benefit of seeking out these more legitimate databases to do the research in, it actually cuts time and it cuts out erroneous information that shouldn't be used, but because you see it online, you take it as fact. And so we all know that that's not true, but in practice, that becomes different to separate. So I would say, as much as the students might not want to hear this, myself included, is we do these in-class library things, and they're very helpful, but a lot of times there's no reinforcement. So there's no mandatory use of it. You know, that kind of sucks because we all need to, you know, like she said, be our own agent of our academic careers, and we all need to see the value and the ethics behind using legitimate databases, especially if we have access to them. But without that reinforcement, I think it's almost certain everyone will revert back.
Yeah. Thanks. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I think for me specifically, I haven't heard about the UCCS database since I was a freshman in the GPS class, and we spent one class on it, maybe.
Yeah.
So it just kind of feels like there's no implementation of it into all of our classes, and especially nothing required with it. So it just kind of feels like the easiest way to go about it is a Google search. And then whether or not we do our own research as to how credible this source is our own problem. But it just feels like there's no application of the database in any of our assignments in really any class I've taken so far. So that's just the biggest gap for me.
Yeah, thank you.
That's exactly what I was going to say also. I think, I'm sure some professors are doing it, but it's definitely not the majority. Same thing, it was like brushed over freshman year, one class with my junior year now. Never have I been told to use it. Never have I really been shown how to use it. It's just been kind of something that I know is there and I'm aware of, but obviously like I've been doing research my own way for so long, like you talked about, we're always going to refer to what we've been doing for so long. So it's easy that way and it's comfortable. And you can be confident finding information the way that you have. So I just think it's teaching to make practical.
Because even if you're assigning, you have to have a peer reviewed article to Google Scholars, right?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the feedback because I think that is what I am seeing. And I mean, I just had a student literally emailing last night about, I'm wondering, I can't really find sources on NAFTA. And I was like, did NAFTA in Mexico? And I was like, well, here's the link. There's like 20,000 or so hits into that in the one search. And, you know, but it is practice. Like in terms of, when I say practice, I mean like what you're accustomed to doing, right? So, and we're not, I don't think we're making students kind of as accustomed to using the library resources as we really could. And that's like a huge resource of information for them.
I agree. I think, you know, they monetize our education so profoundly in our culture that not utilizing these databases that are here for us is really tantamount to wasting your money. The teachers can only
student fee dollars go towards supporting, in part go towards supporting like our subscription to these databases. This knowledge is like ready for you. It's there as part of your tuition. You have a right to like know that it's there and to access it. And I think like it might be like kind of I think part of it can be kind of scary if you don't know, like going to the library in person, going even on the website. If you don't know how to navigate it, it can be like, I'm just going to stay away from that. But it's such a powerful tool. Yeah, it's such a powerful tool. And I think that like empowering students to be able to navigate that and to feel confident, I think is something that you guys deserve that. And if somebody won't give it to you, I think you have the right to take it, right? Like it's there. So I hope that like you take that message and, you know, as you're going through your last year or so here at UCCS, spread that word because the library doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It is like connected to the rest of campus, and it is in large part because of research fee dollars.
I was going to say, to touch on what you were saying down there is, I think a lot of it too is, unfortunately, it's not user friendly. And the searching on it is not as an organic of a feeling as when you search on Google. And that's partially because repetition is king. And if we're not repeating it, it's hard to use. And so it does become scary on face value to use it.
I think they create one source, so it is.
I was gonna say, I feel like you can't get much
Yeah,
easier than one.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, but I just mean as a student, you have to go onto the specific site here. You
Yes.
gotta go to the one search. There are other options. There's market line, there's all these other things. And so, yeah, without repetition, it becomes scary.
Is there time for another comment?
There's one more.
So I'm interested in, it's more nebulous and more vague, but the self-awareness of bias and worldview. That is so hard for us to understand our language unless we explore another language and culture. I teach French. I think our international students might be better at that because they can see it firsthand. They come from another culture. Next week is International Education Week. There's going to be a session on different ways of communicating in different cultures. Those are the kinds of things that I think faculty and students and staff, we can learn from.
Yeah.
Because that is not just intellectual. I mean, that takes a process. It's time to understand that we have a lens, and I think that's a really challenging. It's one of the dispositions for authorities, constructive and contextual. So I thought that was interesting.
These are great discussions, but if we want to be, mindful of our time. But also to let you know, this camera is actually wonderful, much better than when I tried it with my class, because students tend to stand way far away. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for coming. We are going to be able to, I think this video is good enough that we'll be able to upload it. But also, we will also upload the handouts so that everybody has them for electronically. And thank you, students, for participating. You actually gave a lot of information.